Hey friends, let's talk about some practical takeaways on engaging tribes. I think one of the misconceptions that I know I have is as I'm talking with a student, sharing the gospel or discipling them or whatever, is that sometimes we think that we're dealing with a student on this individual basis, that they're thinking only for themselves and there's not any other influences. But the truth is they're involved. They have these webs of relationships, these multiple tribes they're in that are really, that's filtering their decision making. And I think as we think about, as we're engaging these students, we'd be wise to really get that. That would probably remove some frustration maybe sometimes, but also give us a really great idea on how do we reach a student or how do we disciple a student that's kind of involved in these multiple spaces.
Yeah, and I think that's great. A lot of it is when we share the gospel with a student, we need to share it so that they can share it.
Yeah.
And even if they don't believe it yet, they can take it back to their tribe and recall what you told them. And they say, hey, this guy told me this today about Jesus. What do we think about that? And so really, it's more like playing a long game versus the short game. And so it's a lot more like, here's food for thought, take it, discuss it. And it doesn't always work in a formal way. Sometimes it's like, filtered through, like you said, it's filtered through so many layers. But I just think our tendency is to treat a campus like it's a two-dimensional thing. Everyone falls into a certain category. And that's just not the reality. Yeah. Certainly not anymore, if it ever was. And I think more than ever, people belong to these groupings that are so influential in their lives. And it's like now we have 5-dimensional, connections. And so we just have to keep that in mind. Whenever you talk to somebody, you're really talking to a representative of a group. And some of these tribes are tiny and close-knit. Some of them are like really vague and big and general. And so you don't get the luxury of sort of talking to the whole tribe.
Yeah.
And so that's a challenge, I think, in ministry, but a huge, huge opportunity.
Totally. And I'm even thinking of a student right now that, there's a part of our ministry, he was involved faithfully, but had never taken that step to trust in Christ. And we're a little bit puzzled about it. Do some background. Well, he comes from a Catholic background, a rich Catholic background. Well, in him coming to faith and being baptized, that was going to be a really big deal, which kind of helps know, like, okay, he's from that tribe. There's a lot of family ties there. That's really that is not just a decision. That's not just an easy decision for him to make. Yeah. That's going to cause a rift back home. And he's thinking through the cost of all those things.
That's right.
And even also with, if there's a fraternity, there is a certain kind of clique there and a bond there that sometimes it's hard, that usually the fraternity is always going to take priority over a church activity or something like that. Why? Because if they don't go, they get so much flack from the other brothers in their fraternity, and it's going to be really hard.
Well, and too often we want to draw a line in the sand. Look, you can't spend time with them. They're a bad influence, so you got to come to our thing or their thing. Choose,
Yeah.
And I think so we would do better to leave students connected to their tribe, and let's adapt. We'll be the ones to adjust our schedule. We'll meet around your schedule and make sure that you can connect with us. And in doing so, I'll be honest, it's messier that way.
Yeah,
because it's not as neat, it's not as streamlined, and there's a lot of baggage, and a student's journey, will kind of come and go as they are influenced more by the fraternity, but at the same time, what does stick will last, and their ability to then process that as a group. I think more and more we could see fraternities coming to faith, or groups within fraternities, and it just seems like so destructive if we're not careful of those relationships.
Oh, totally.
So I think one thing that's interesting, just a good exercise, is just stop and consider all the tribes you're part of. Have you done this? Like, think about how many different groups do you pertain to, either loose groups or tight-knit groups?
Yeah.
Probably several, right?
Yeah. You think of family, you think big Dallas Cowboy fan. I love, there's many of them.
Right.
And so,
any number of those have different layers of influence on your life, and that also means you're able to connect with others in those tribes.
Totally. And I even think too, as you were talking about, you don't want to burn any bridges within the tribe they're in. And like, for instance, let's take the young man with the Catholic family. Well, him coming to faith, that's going to be a rift. But if you just say, hey, we're just going to pull you out of that, well, now you've got parents that are mad at you and at your church. But if there's a I guess if you're kind of sensitive to that and careful with that, there's actually a bridge to influence more people.
I mean, can you imagine the Catholic family that says, look, I don't know who you are or what you're teaching, but since my son has known you and been part of your ministry, he's a better son.
Yeah.
He's a better family member. What's going on?
Yeah.
Right? That's so much more winsome. Now, you can't always do it that way. And there's times when there needs to be a cutoff. So we're not trying to prescribe anything here, but just open up our eyes to maybe be a little more sensitive and not rush to tear people away. We call it extractional discipleship.
Yeah, that's good. So as we're engaging with these different tribes, it would really be wise for us to understand that the students are not one-dimensional. They're not two-dimensional. They're multi-dimensional, and they're involved in these different tribes that are they're filtering their decision making, their thoughts, their worldview, all these things. And so we need to be sensitive to that. But even in that, as you're engaging college students that are involved in these tribes, is that as you're impacting them with the gospel and you're doing so in a very loving way, what you're going to end up happening is you're going to have an even greater influence, because as you're impacting them, they're actually going to impact the people in their tribes with the gospel. And it just offers you a greater influence in the life of a student.